And firstly, I want to start with a thank you, because virtually everyone in this room is deeply, deeply involved in pushing for democratic reform in this country, and I really appreciate it. You're all working towards it in different ways, and I think that's often how you achieve change. I know that from my experience on umpteen campaigns I've worked on before I got into politics and as a Green Party councillor, that very often the way we achieve change is from multiple actors in civil society, individuals, elected representatives, all calling for the same thing or slightly different but complementary things in their own ways. So that pincer movement is key. So, how do we create a democracy fit for the 21st century? Well, I wouldn't start from here. And in fact, the Conservative government have taken us in categorically the wrong direction on democratic reform. Voter ID, of course, is the one that's been hitting the headlines a lot recently. Fixing a problem that doesn't exist and disenfranchising, we don't know exactly how many yet, but pretty clearly thousands of voters, overwhelmingly the more disadvantaged and vulnerable people in society. In February last year, as part of my duties as co-leader, I visited Bradford, where I met lots of first and second generation migrants from Kashmir. And one of the first questions they asked me, slightly to my surprise, was, what does the Green Party think about voter ID? Because they were worried about disenfranchisement of their community. And unfortunately, I think they were right to be. Okay, so voter ID, that's one of the ways the government is taking us in the wrong direction. What else? Government control of the Electoral Commission. This one's really slid under the radar. I expect all of you know about it, but it is a quiet but terrifying consequence of the Elections Act last year. Let's be clear, the UK no longer has an independent invigilator of elections, and that is really dangerous for democracy. Third, making peaceful protest illegal, as evidenced in the way that the coronation was policed just recently, with the improper arrest of 6 organisers from Republic, a journalist and a member of the public completely bemused by being arrested for a protest she was unaware was taking place. How long until campaigners for proportional representation are arrested, rather? Elected quite soon, hopefully. Fourth, imposing directly elected mayors. Again, this is something that I think outside the democracy sector maybe doesn't get talked about a great deal, but directly elected mayors are an extreme concentration of power in the hands of one person, and I know this as a councillor on a council that has one. The government did that because I suspect it's easier for a Conservative government to pick up the phone to 20 odd individuals and twist their arm than to deal with broader multi-party administrations on councils all over the country. And then even worse, they imposed first past the post on those elections, removing the one scrap of preferential voting we had in England. Dare I suggest that this was because under supplementary vote the Tories won fewer mayoral seats than they were expecting to? I think the Tory win of Bedford mayor under first past the post this month suggests that might be the case. And the symptoms of all of these steps in the wrong direction are becoming rather obvious. Every month or so there is a new scandal, whether it's the parties in lockdown, remember that? Bullying ministers, or bullying by ministers, I beg your pardon, or fudging taxes. When I'm in interviews or on panel discussions, one of the questions I get asked most often is what I think of the latest sleaze or scandal from this government. And my answer is always the same. Boris Johnson, Owen Paterson, Nadhim Zahawi, Dominic Raab, insert name here, whoever it's going to be next, is certainly a bad apple, but the whole tree is rotten and the whole country wants reform. What we have here, I believe, is an issue that goes to the heart of trust in politics and standards in public life. Of course, there are politicians who are honest and honourable and go into politics for all the right reasons. The trouble is that our less than democratic political system is so broken that it breeds politicians and governments like this, where MPs feel that they can do whatever they want. Voters deserve better than that. In 2019, the Conservatives gained 7% more MPs on just a 1% increase in vote share. This unfair voting system creates a culture of safe seats because in hundreds of MPs' constituencies, they do not have to work hard or at all to get elected and are not held accountable for their actions. There is a culture of hypocrisy and entitlement that goes to the heart of our political system, and we need to change the way our democracy works to root it out. So, what are the solutions? Well, the Green Party would introduce proportional representation, of course, for all elections to all levels of government. We'd introduce votes at 16. We would repeal the anti-protest and anti-trade union laws that have come through. We would, getting a bit more niche now, introduce job sharing for elected representatives, as Green parliamentary candidates Claire Phipps and Sarah Cope tried to take to court when they wanted to stand as job share candidates in 2015. One had caring responsibilities, the other had a health condition that meant that neither of them could do the job full time, but they both had the skills and the experience that would make them brilliant MPs, but the court said no. We would introduce a fair system of state funding for political parties to eliminate the dependence on large private donations that skews, I believe, decisions and policies by many political parties. And we would strengthen transparency on political lobbying and donations. We'd also remove the cap on fines that the Electoral Commission can impose, which currently, I think, blunts its teeth, and obviously we would make it independent again as well. And we would introduce real devolution, a much more decentralised system like many of our European neighbours have, with more power for local and regional government and Scottish and Welsh parliaments, and Northern Irish, as is the norm in many European countries. And of course, if a nation wants to have an independence referendum, we would allow them to have it, obviously. And we don't believe anyone should have the power to govern our country based solely on which family they happen to have been born into, whether that's hereditary members of the House of Lords or the monarchy. So, we'd introduce an elected upper house to replace the patronage and hereditary power in the House of Lords, and we'd set up a citizens' convention to examine further ways to strengthen democracy, including a written constitution, the potential for use of direct democracy, and to discuss the future, or not, of the monarchy's role in the political system. I believe this set of policies makes the Greens the strongest party on democratic reform. And, by the way, as an aside, we're also very democratic internally. Unlike certain other parties I could name, our party policies are drafted, proposed, prioritised and voted on by members at conference, one member, one vote. The leadership has no veto, and I wouldn't have it any other way. In fact, when I joined the Green Party in 2011, this very non-hierarchical structure and high level of internal democracy was a key factor in me making that decision to not just be a Green Party voter, but to join the movement and get involved. Anyway, back out of that tangent about our internal democracy and on to national democratic reform. Fortunately, we don't have to start from a blank page. Many countries in Europe are kilometres ahead of us on this already, and in many other areas of public policy as well, I might add. But Labour and the Conservatives, the two tired old political parties in this country, have blocked meaningful reform, refusing to learn from our European cousins with their heads in the sand. A better politics, though, is possible, and as a Green, I am committed to making it happen. So, and don't worry, this isn't going to be a party political broadcast, but just to give you a bit of context about me and what I'm doing about this, as you're probably aware, as well as being co-leader of the Green Party of England and Wales and one of the 25 Green councillors in Bristol, I'm also standing as an MP candidate in Bristol, where the Greens have a very good chance in the next general election. And from my experience so far, politically and in my career before that as an engineer, I've learned a few things about how I work. Being an engineer, I've got quite a problem-solving, why can't it be better than this attitude, which I suspect everyone in this room has too. I like collaborating inside and outside party politics, that pincer movement that so often achieves change. And I like going into fussy old institutions and shaking them up from the inside. There is so much I want to fix in Parliament to tackle the climate emergency, the cost of living crisis and the care crisis. One specific thing that's high on my to-do list is to give more power to renters facing spiralling rents, poor housing standards and for many the constant threat of eviction. I did not realise how timely this comment would be when I wrote the speech a couple of weeks ago. I want to give councils the power to introduce rent controls. That's something that currently the UK government does not allow councils to do. It already exists in many European cities. See again about learning from our European neighbours, and it could easily be brought in the UK. So that's one of the things I want to prioritise in Parliament. And of course, the support we can give people on the cost of living crisis, whether it's their rent or their bills, is so good for the climate too. Last year, the government published an energy strategy, but it only touched on energy efficiency. And this year, the government published an energy security strategy that majored on CCS and nuclear. Still barely any mention of some mention of renewables, but barely any mention of insulation in both of those, which is, of course, the cheapest way to bring down bills and carbon emissions, because if you're not having to heat the air in your house so much because it's not blowing out the window so much with all the drafts. So I want to bring my experience as a renewable energy engineer to that problem. And third, my priority is fixing our democracy. And we potentially have a really big opportunity here, because the likely outcome of the next general election is either an outright Labour government or maybe a Labour minority that needs another party or parties' support to form government. Now, unlike Labour and the Liberal Democrats, us Greens are very happy to talk about that possibility and the ramifications now, before an election. And we are very clear that we would be open to working with other political parties, just as our sister Green parties do in the 8 European countries where the Green Party is already in government. Austria, Belgium, Finland, Germany, Ireland, Luxembourg, Montenegro, and of course Scotland. But we are also crystal clear that we will not be handing over any unilateral gifts. We will not be standing aside for other parties in parliamentary seats unless there is a fair agreement, a progressive alliance, if you like, where they agree to do the same. And while our door is very much open and always has been for such discussions, I have to say it sadly looks like the chances of Labour and the Lib Dems taking up that offer are pretty microscopic right now. And after the election, if Labour come knocking then, well, we'll negotiate strongly. We'll learn from the Scottish Greens, who secured key social and environmental policy commitments from the SNP in exchange for their support. I really admire the hard negotiation they did there. And we will have clear red lines, including strong climate policies and a commitment to bringing in a proportional voting system. So, there is a chance, just a chance, that Greens and or another political party that supports proportional representation could be in a rare and short-lived powerful situation where we can make these demands. Are we ready to do so? That's my question. Are all of the PR supporting political parties ready? Do we know which system or systems we want or could live with? And are we all agreed that this would be a red line to entering or supporting a government? By far our best chance is if all the parties that support PR make it a red line. That way Labour can't pick the party with the weakest demands. That's a real risk that I'm worried about currently. Greens, Lib Dems, the SNP, Plaid, Alliance, and for what it's worth, the Brexit Party have all backed the Good Systems Agreement, which, as I'm sure you all know, is an agreement on the basic tenets of what makes a good voting system, so that we can all be united in our demands and try to prevent a falling out on the specifics. I think the Good Systems Agreement was an excellent idea, and thank you to everyone who brought it about. But I really think that we in political parties need to start talking to each other now to build that road to PR. So that if we do get that golden, narrow opportunity to set out PR as a red line in any deals as part of or to support a government, we have done that scenario planning in advance and we're clear what we want and how. And we can lay it on the table quickly, importantly. The Green Party is ready to have those conversations. I think maybe it needs one or more of the organisations in this room to facilitate them. And of course, a different theory of change, or a parallel theory of change, see that pincer movement again. Next week, on the 24th of May, we have the Sort the System mass lobby of MPs, lobbying in favour of proportional representation, where the goal is to have at least one resident of every constituency in the country come up to London to lobby their MP. And at that mass lobby, you will also get to meet many of my Green colleagues, including Deputy Leader Zach Polanski, who sends his apologies for this evening, our brand new democracy spokesperson and relatively new Newham councillor Nate Higgins, and former leader and now member of the House of Lords Natalie Bennett. I'm going to sum up by quoting Natalie Bennett, actually, who, one of my predecessors, former leader of the Green Party and now in the House of Lords trying to dismantle it from the inside. She, like me and everyone in the Green Party, is a fierce proponent of electoral reform, and she has a point she's fond of making when she's asked, what do you think about democracy in the UK? She says, well, I think it would be a very good idea. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a lovely evening and keep up the good fight.